Hi, this is Levi Fletcher, and this is my presentation of my project on impact of response anonymity on learning of mathematics in the high school setting. So this research is going to be focused around the ability to anonymize student input and their questions and responses in a classroom discussion. That not every comment or question would have to be anonymized, that students would be free to also raise their hands, speak verbally. Obviously, when somebody speaks out loud in class, they are no longer anonymous. Folks know who they are. But what we can do through a number of applications, and specifically we'll be using Desmos Activity Builder for this project, but is to anonymize student response so that the students can type in on like a Chromebook, type in questions, type in comments, and specifically for this, they'll be in the middle of a math lesson, responding to teacher prompts, responding to student prompts and questions, and giving feedback to one another through this tool. So our research question is does submitting class discussion responses anonymously impact student achievement in the high school math setting? And then we're going to be looking at two specific areas. For the Common Core state standards, there are both content standards, and then math practice standards. There's 8 mathematical practices for Common Core state standards, and they're more about how one engages with and works through mathematics. Our research here will be looking at specifically the math content standard for high school math of reasoning with equations and inequalities. And the specific standard is understanding solving equations as a process of reasoning and explain the reasoning. And similarly, math practice standard number 3 is to construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. So these two standards, one from math content and one from math practice, were chosen specifically because they deal with reasoning and explaining reasoning. And the curiosity here is, as students are having dialogue and discussions and able to engage in that anonymously, how does that support them in their learning and being able to critique one another's reasoning, but not have that same fear of peer pressure that they might if it was obvious who was asking questions and making comments. And so for the literature review, it touches on a few different aspects of this, but there really is a gap, as we'll discuss in just a moment. In 2006, a study was done that showed that students did strongly agree that being able to respond anonymously helped in their learning. The context for this study was professors using clickers in class and getting just the aggregated data for how students responded to a multiple choice question. So they wouldn't know what students had said what, but they were able to find out how a class might respond. So it was live, but not at all discussion based. In 2010, a study was done about the use of anonymity in an asynchronous online course. So now it was discussion based, but not live, not face to face. And what was found in this study, though, was that the being able to post and respond anonymously did bolster peer feedback and critique. The feedback that students got and the critique that students got from one another was in greater depth than it had been when it was when the names were attached. So students were able to engage in that conversation to a greater amount. In 2011, a study, so this one's going to be synchronous now at this point, but it's still online, and it was with students role playing and responding to one another anonymously. And it did seem to unleash students to really give open and useful feedback to their peers. One note from this study, though, was that the feedback tended to be towards the role that the students were playing in, and not necessarily towards the actual content of their comments. And then in 2012, a study was done in which live and in class students gave one another feedback, and what was found was that the peer pressure was reduced, and the effects of peer pressure rather were reduced when students felt like they needed to give critical feedback or low scores to their peers. However, again, this one's not discussion based, and so it's kind of exposing the hole in the literature here. But was on responding to students with a Likert style responses, so letting them know what essentially their score on a presentation would be. And so students were free to give lower scores when they knew that their feedback was going to be anonymous. So again, the gaps in the literature is there's not research around using technology to be able to have live in-class discussions where it really is about the discussion and the content of those discussions. So leveraging anonymizing features of Desmos Activity Builder to hopefully fill in this gap in the literature. So the research strategy, this is going to be quasi-experimental. The control group will use Desmos Activity Builder, and same lessons, everything about the class will be taught the same. But in the control group, they will not use the anonymization features. So students' names will be attached to their questions and to their comments that they post there in Desmos. The treatment group, however, will use the anonymizing features, and instead of their name being attached, they'd have a pseudonym of a famous mathematician. After they've gone through the treatment or been in the control group, we compare pre and post tests to look at how much the students in each group's how much their student scores increased on those two measures, the content practice standard, the content standard and the practice standard. And then at that point, we would use independent samples t-tests to see if the increase in the means was statistically relevant. Participants would be approximately 180 to 240 high school students in Northern California for integrated Math 1 courses. That's primarily freshmen. And depending on the semester, either 3 or 4 teachers would be able to participate in this. And the teachers would need to have 2 classes of integrated 1, and one that they would teach without the anonymizing features, and one that would be the control group, and then one with the anonymizing features being the treatment group. And obviously this is going to be a convenient sampling, choosing, getting classes, courses where there are a teacher teaching 2 of them, so that you could have one in the control and one in the treatment group. Data collection, pre and post tests would be assessing those two standards discussed earlier, one practice standard and one content standard. The permissions, obviously we need to get permissions from students and their families from the school, and then be really secure with the data and very confidential with the data as well. So making sure that no student names are attached, but just assigning them to random numbers, and make sure that the data is stored securely, password protected, and just really every effort is taken to be secure and confidential with that student data. Finally, the data analysis, an independent samples t-test for the mean of the increase for both the treatment group and the control group, that are differences in those means statistically relevant.